here with Production Online. I have Kevin Penner right here in the virtual flesh in his studio. We're coming to you live right here in our private community. Kevin, how are you today?
Doing very well. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Good, good. Well, I see you got some Christmas vibes going up there. That's
Yeah.
tis the season. I mean,
Yeah, just, putting up a little bit of stuff to sometimes, helps the vibe if you want to turn the lights down to have those up.
yeah, that's awesome. Well, Kevin, we just kind of wanted to take some time, let some students ask some questions. So if you're logging on, you can just comment below and we'll see your comments. We can, answer them, sift through them, talk with Kevin about what he sees as being the best way. We're just kind of looking at some pro tips with Kevin. So we're going to be talking about all things studio recording. We may discuss some projects you're working on, that kind of fun stuff. But Kevin, first, we just kind of want to learn a little bit about you. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, how did you get into the audio world?
Well, the audio world, I started off as being a drummer back in, well, as early as middle school, and used to do a lot of touring. I was with a band, actually, with my wife, and we were on a, Christian label back in the day and did a lot of touring together. And as we kind of got more tired from touring, we were spending more and more time at home. And we love music, and I'm kind of more technically inclined. And I think it was just like a natural progression to, start recording our own demos and continue to work at, more music recording at home. And yeah, we just kept doing that, and it's just growing. We moved to LA a little while ago from Hawaii. Actually, my wife's from Hawaii, but we've been in LA now. Yeah, so we've been in LA now for quite a while, and yeah, it just grew and grew, and I got more and more into recording. We record a lot of our own stuff, and just yeah,
That's great.
It's been a fun ride, So
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
that was kind of the natural progression to go that way and start working on our own stuff more.
yeah, I mean, since you guys are kind of husband-wife duo, you must have kind of mastered some more at-home studio type setups at first, right? Did you get some of those at first when you guys were starting off?
Yeah, I think we've been together for a little while, and there wasn't as much high quality home recording gear then. So the recordings we were doing were pretty rough and more for our own purposes, and we've come a long way since then. But yeah, it was mostly for ourselves, and then when we moved to LA, then I started recording more and more other bands, and of course you get better at what you do. It's worked out well with my wife because she doesn't really care about the technical stuff at all, and I have fun doing it, and so we balance each other really well that way, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so she just gets to create musically and
Yeah, she's very much a creator.
wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what does your setup look like in your studio, like your recording setup specifically?
I have, I don't know, do you want me to move the camera or not? But it's just right here. I just have a rack of mic pre's, and I have like a Pro Tools HD setup. And yeah, I mean, I have just like a one room. I have a couple of ISO booths off to the side where I, can put vocalists in. Sometimes when I'm doing live band recordings, throw the vocalist in there and then, close the door. I got a couple ISO booths for that. And then I have the drums behind me here. When we were in Hawaii, I actually had a recording set up there where I had it split up into two rooms, and the rooms were smaller. And when we moved to LA, I realized that I actually prefer being in the same room that I'm recording, because it allows, because a lot of us, like, this is a converted garage. It's a separate building, but it used to be a garage, and so it has a somewhat finite space. The ISO booths off the back were added on. To the back of the building, so they extend further. But the long and short of it is, when you have a certain amount of space, I prefer having a bigger room and no control room and being in the same room, because it's really only when you're doing the drums that it's an issue.
Yeah.
And then there's such good isolation headphones now that just for while I'm tracking drums, kind of everybody wears isolation headphones, and that's worked out pretty well.
Yeah, well, and with being in a small room, we have a lot of students who are recording out of their bedroom or out of their garage. And it would be really cool if you had any kind of tips on how to keep down the bleed between, microphones of recording in the same room. Like, do you have any tricks you've learned over the years of recording in smaller spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. There's tricks. I mean, honestly, like most of the time people don't track live. It's more like an overdub situation. So I'm just recording drums, or very often drums and bass together, and then, to a scratch, or maybe we'll have like a guitarist vocalist that I'll put in the booth. So I do have a booth for isolation. So I can put a singer, guitar player in there, and they can, play their rough tracks in there. And then really we're looking to keep the drums and the bass together. And of course, bass is the easiest thing ever to just DI.
Yeah.
And so I do have, like an old Ampeg amp and some different gear that I can record, but I find that I just DI it and then I'll reamp it after the fact.
Yeah.
As far as getting a good drum sound in a small room, it's so much about, I mean, the shape of the room, the drums, everything you've heard before, I guess,
Yeah.
but the tuning of the drums, quality of the drums, and really a lot about the placement of the drums in the room. So I started off recording my drums on one wall, and then I moved it into the next corner, and then I tried the next wall, and then I tried the next corner, and then I tried the next wall, and I tried the next. So I've literally started, when I started in this room, I had my drum set in a certain place, used that for, months, half a year to a year. I don't really know. I don't remember, but for a good amount of time.
Yeah.
And then moved it to another location, moved to another location, and, gradually added more treatment.
So you're
And I would
finding what
say that,
works.
to find out what works, it's just you try again, you live with it, and you kind of learn, over time, eventually you kind of learn the issues of your room. Some of those you can deal with trapping. A lot of it you can deal with placement. That goes for your monitors too. And so, yeah, a really big part of the drum sound in a small room is getting your mics to work together with whatever's bouncing back off you. So, my room is really dry. So that's over time I added more and more to deaden it, because there's so many ways now and so many good plugins to make things sound more alive. And so I find in a smaller room, it's usually better to have a tighter sound and then add more ambience. Because if you do have ambience in a smaller room, it's usually a little more boxy sounding. And so one of the tricks I do to make drum sound bigger in a smaller room is right now I actually have some mics pointing at the floor, maybe a foot away from the floor, pointing at the floor on each side of the drum set, kind of off to each side.
Okay.
And so they're getting only reflections off the floor. And then I basically send that into a reverb, like a room reverb, and then compress and treat that like I would a normal.
Wow.
Like when I get a recording from a big studio and I have
That's really cool.
big room mics. Another trick you can do is, have your mics a little further out in front of the kit, but then set up a gobo with your mics in behind that, pointing away from the kit. So they're being blocked from all the direct sound. So it's just getting all the reflections. And then just find a place in the room where those reflections, it takes experimenting. It really does. And find a place where those reflections, you can add reverb to it and essentially create a room out of it. And then after you put like a room reverb on those kind of reasonably dry room mics, kind of dead room mics. But because you're not getting the direct sound, it really helps to give it a bit more of that further away feel. The other trick that I use a lot during mixing and before it goes to the reverb is to use a transient designer. I don't usually use a lot of compression on room mics. A lot of guys do. I tend to use transient designers, especially in a smaller room. And so I'll use the attack and suck out most of the attack and then turn up the sustain and then send it to a reverb. And it really kind of has that more smoother, even sound of a big room once you kind of get the right mics and the location. If you have a lot of like cymbal sizzle, a lot of bashy cymbal noise, that's minimized by when you point your mics away. But if there's still high end getting in there, instead of low passing it, I tend to Just use, like, I use Pro Tools, so I use lo-fi, and I just turn down the sample rate like 1 or 2 clicks, and it somehow takes away all the top end hash, and you have this more body sound that you can blend in, and I
Just
can,
like that.
just like that, yeah, I can make it sound huge. I would say, the key is the overheads and how those interact, especially with the snare. And so I feel like that's the one of the biggest factors for being in a small room is how the overheads interact with the close mics, the snare mic especially. And I actually generally measure my overheads to be the same distance from the center of the snare.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I literally, if I move, and probably partly because I have a cathedral ceiling in here, so if I have it on the the wall underneath that, or like underneath the slanted part, it really changes how the drums come off of that ceiling back into the mics. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is if you don't have, kind of like a higher ceiling or a cathedral ceiling, because you have that low flat ceiling just reflecting all this, a lot of garbage right back into your overhead. So if you can really like deaden, I got like 2 layers of trapping directly above my drums, just so that I really don't get any reflection kind of back off of the ceiling.
Wow. And what miking situations do you typically use for your drums?
Again, it
depends.
It depends. I use a space pair most of the time.
Okay.
But I would say that as I change, if I put my drums, like if they're in the wall directly behind me versus coming out of that corner, I find that I like an ORTF pattern sounds better to me. Whereas in this corner, space pair sounds better, or even the recorder man position sounds really fat. So it's just about how the overheads interact with the direct mics and the reflections off the room. So it's interesting because right behind me, if I do a space pair, I really don't like the way the snare sounds. I mean, it's weird. I don't have any explanation for it, but just about how it interacts with the room.
Yeah, because you're playing with everything else, all the other factors in the room.
Right. There's other tricks, when it comes to mixing, where a lot of your phase problems happen in the lower frequencies because it's easier for low end to get funky quicker, for lack of a better explanation. And so if you're in a smaller room, step back a bit. When it comes to overheads, I'm generally trying to get a pretty overall kit balance in my overheads. Some guys just treat it like cymbal mics. I don't really do that unless I'm working on like a metal record, which I don't really do much of anymore. But if you are, so there's kind of 2 ways to approach it for me. If I start with my overheads and then add in the direct mics, I tend to not high pass my overheads because you get a lot of low end. If they're in the room the right way, you can get a lot of low end coming in your overheads that's very usable. And you get these, guys will comment like, oh, you get these really fat snare sounds. I'm like, well, a lot of it is because I don't high pass my overheads, and I've learned where in my room I get the best low end and the overheads combining with the direct snare mics.
Wow.
It's like that combination. And if it's kind of funny, or I'm mixing stuff that hadn't been recorded here, a lot of times that low end might be weird or boomy or whatever, and then you'll high pass it, and you'll have to kind of get all your low end from the direct mics. Maybe you have room mics or something. So those are a couple different tricks. And of course, always check the phase, because the phase is out, you're never going to get it right.
That's the truth. I mean, that's just a lot of experimenting at the source, which is, I think, really vital for setting up your tracking session.
Yes,
it's just making sure that you test things out before jumping straight in.
Yeah, and trying a lot of different stuff, and find out what works for you. And of course, if you have, less mics, you're gonna do something different than if you have more mics. Or it's like if you are miking like a recorder man or like a Glenn John style where you're doing less mics, what you're looking to get from your close mics is maybe going to be different than if you're using your overheads as cymbal mics.
That's true.
So, with the kit, it's really everything affects everything, and I try to treat it as a whole. And so that's kind of some of my thoughts.
That's really cool. I love that. I wanted to talk a little bit about what your kind of sessions look like, your recording sessions. And we can talk about that in a couple different ways. One thing that I'd love to hear, and I know a lot of the students would love to hear, is how you set up your recording session on the computer. What's your DAW of choice, and kind of how do you lay things out? Like, do you have any go-tos when you're setting up either tracking or production sessions?
Um,
It's pretty open-ended. You can kind
yeah,
of take that whatever.
it's a pretty open-ended question. Um, yeah, I mean, so I typically have, because my drums are always set up, and actually the way I like my setup, I don't run a patch bay,
Okay.
which is something I've been trying to avoid my entire recording career. Um, what I like to do is actually have enough stuff where all my main stuff I can leave plugged in, which isn't something everybody's able to do. But all that stuff is kind of set up. So I actually have like a template, for my drums. I just click on the template, it pops up, and all my inputs, I basically have to patch one thing in, and I'm ready to go. All my inputs are there. So
Nice.
I have a pretty good setup as far as that goes. So I'm not sure exactly, what specifically you're looking for information wise, but I would just have all my drum channels, and then it helps to create a bit of a vibe in the mix. So because I do so much of my drum sound after the recording, like I get good basic sounds, but I don't do a lot of stuff on the way in.
It's pretty clean processing.
It's pretty clean process. Well, I don't know if clean. I just don't have a lot of I'll compress my overheads a little bit,
Yeah.
and depending on what kind of project I'm doing, I'll maybe vary my room mics, and or sometimes I'll have a mic that's like in the center of the kit that'll crush with the 1176, kind of all buttons in sort of a thing. I don't always use it. It kind of depends on what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Uh, and then other than that, I think one kind of trick to getting really fat drum sounds, at least for more rock type stuff, I have a bunch of API mic preamps, and I hit them pretty hard on the close mics, especially not the kick so much, because distorted mic preamps on the kick sounds kind of bad. I feel like this is really where having really great gear makes a difference for
Yeah.
drums, especially rock. If you have transformerless mic preamps that are maybe built into your interface, you can't do this with them. It'll sound really, really bad. But if you have some transformer-based mic preamps where you have an output knob and you can kind of drive into the transformers, you can get some saturation out of it. And so what I do is not too much on the kick drum, if at all, but really on the snare drum a lot, and a little bit on the toms, where I'll drive it in. If you actually look at the waveform, it actually kind of brick walls that are saturates and actually clips off a little bit of the transient.
Hmm.
So it helps you get like a little bit of a fatter tone.
Yeah.
And the way I compensate for that is my overheads I leave really natural. And so I'm getting a lot of that kind of high-end open transient from the overheads. This goes back to, how I use my overheads, kind of more of an overall kit. So I'm getting that detail and the 3D-ness from the overheads, and I'm really looking to just get like impact and power from the close mics. And so my snare drum sometimes it's crazy how hard, depending on the type of music, you can drive into the mic pre's and really saturate it. And it's the kind of sound that, when you're mixing, guys might use, Decapitator or Lo-Fi in plugin form to kind of get a little bit of that. But I find that doing a little bit of that on the way in can really help.
It does the trick.
It does a trick, yeah. So I actually rarely use compression on direct mics, even in when I'm mixing.
Wow.
I treat a lot of it just like overall kit type stuff.
Wow, that's really cool. Now, your vocal chain. Tell us a little bit about that. What's your go-to vocal chain? And of course, it changes on the style of stuff you do, because you do a lot of different types of recording.
Yeah, I've done a lot of different types. I used to do a lot of like hard rock stuff. I haven't for a while. Now it's just, a lot of kind of big worship music stuff. My wife's stuff is kind of more lighter acoustic pop, some electro pop stuff. Yeah, like some Americana stuff. Yeah, more indie rock, pop rock, worship, yada yada. Yeah, as far as the vocal chain, I mean, it really is so much about the vocalist. I feel like with most other instruments, you can get away with I don't know, using the same mic, I guess. It's like a snare. I pretty much always have a 57 on it.
Yeah.
You can always use a 57 on a guitar. Yeah, I've used plenty of other mics on it, but I could always make it work with a 57. With a vocalist, I really feel that, mic selection helps you out huge. And it's not always the mic that you expect to win that you pick. So, but yeah, my vocal chain, I have some Undertone Audio mic pre's. It's Eric Valentine's company. I love his engineering and producing, but they're kind of interesting mic pre's because you can run them transformerless, so they sound more like a GML, like just super super transparent. Or they have switches on them where you can switch in the input transformer and the output transformer separately. They have like a loading switch on there where you can run it, the output, in 600 ohms. You can change the impedance of the input. So basically, you can go from everything from super super transparent hi-fi to kind of more mid-rangey, saturated vintage tones in this one mic preamp, which is a big reason why I got it, because it's just everything right there. You don't have to repatch anything. And so that's the mic pre I use. And then that goes into I have an API 550A EQ. If I need EQ, I use it not that often. Probably only, it's patched in there, but I probably go without it more often than I use it. So that's in the chain. And then I usually go into an 1176.
Okay, cool.
And I have a modified 1176, which has like the original style transformers and also some Carnhill transformers, which are like Neve type transformers.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. So I get the character of the 1176, but I have the transformers basically from like a Neve type. And that's kind of my main chain. When I use dynamic mics, that's typically what I would use if I'm recording, vocals with a ribbon mic or a condenser mic. Now, if I'm using a dynamic mic for recording vocals, like an SM7 or 57 or 421 or something like that, I would sometimes go to my API pre's because they kind of roll off the top end a bit more. If I'm doing a rock thing, I'm really more about the mid-range kind of drive than the air. So I might change the mic preamps, but then I'll go into like an LA2A compressor. And there's something for me when I'm using an SM7 that I actually prefer going into like an LA3A style compressor instead of an 1176. That would be the main difference. And then for microphones, I got a bunch of different mics. I usually start with a condenser. I have like a 251 type mic. Which is kind of more your brighter, airier mic. And then I have like a 67 type mic, which is, has a little more of that bit more of a mid bite and isn't as airy. And if both of those are kind of taking your head off, or it's an aggressive singer, or those are too crispy, then I would try an SM7. And that has more of that mid focus. If I'm doing a live recording, that's pretty much always going to be the mic of choice. Yeah,
that's cool.
And then I could keep talking from there. It's nice. Sometimes I'll record background vocals, with a different mic. If it's the same singer doing backgrounds, maybe like a ribbon mic or something, just so it has a different texture, so it takes up a different space. So you're not building up all in the same frequencies if you're using the same vocals.
Yeah, that frequency, box is so important in where you're placing your instruments, your vocalists. And that way you can, properly carve out and shape everything.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Let's see, I had another question for you that I think would be really cool for us to cover. If we were to want to start, a home studio, what are kind of your top 3 gear pieces? It can be anything from a laptop with a DAW. It can be, microphone interface. Like, what are kind of your top 3? If you're going to get something to record at home, this is what you want to get.
Just in
general. Yeah, even if you have some like interfaces in mind, or like the type of gear you like to use for someone who was going to be on a budget at home doing this.
Yeah, so that's a little. I mean, thankfully I'm blessed to have had pretty good stuff for a while. So I'm not quite in that same situation. Although I do get a lot of stuff in from various people who have setups, and I would say that just interface wise, a lot of guys like the Universal Audio, like the Apollo Twin and those interfaces. I find that a lot of guys are using those. The tracks come in sounding great. I would say that the newer blackface ones or dark gray or whatever you want to call it, those to me were the first ones that I was really stoked on the sound of it. I felt like the older silverface ones, because I can be picky, I felt like they felt a little prosumer still sound wise, and I really feel like they upped the game on the conversion a lot on those blackface ones. So those seem to be something that a lot of guys are happy with. So I'd say interface wise, that's a pretty solid choice. There's so much of the stuff right now is really good, and because I'm not using those types of interfaces because I have an HD setup, I don't know that I can specifically say as far as interface. As far as what I think is the most important, and I wish somebody would have drilled into my head when I started, it would have saved me a lot of time. Maybe is monitors.
Yes.
I think that monitoring in your room, man, that's so important. I think that unless you're just getting something super, super cheapo, I think that now compared to 10, 15 years ago, pretty much most of the consumer, prosumer interfaces are pretty darn good. I think that your creativity and actually being able to hear and know what you're listening to, like far outweighs those differences. Back when we used to run ADATs and stuff, some of those interfaces were super bad sounding, where it wouldn't really matter what not ADAT specifically, but some of the the early, I don't want to name any names, but some of the earlier interfaces were really awful, or even like the first M-Box and that kind of stuff. They were definitely left something to be desired. But now a lot of the higher end stuff is it drips down into the less expensive stuff. So the interface is you're doing pretty well. But yeah, I wish when I started out, I wanted the cool looking rack gear, and I bought the Avalon stuff and whatever, just stuff to bling in the rack. And I feel like one of the best purchases I ever made was upgrading my monitors and speakers, which I've done a couple times, and found something that really translates. Some of that's experience, but if you start out with good ones and you can have somebody come in or do your best to kind of tune your room, move your speakers around if you can, and moving your speakers around in your room. Placement is honestly probably, again, so many speakers that are inexpensive are great now. But yeah, the best speakers you can afford, and then experiment with placement in your room. How far they are away from the wall, how far apart they are, where they are in your room makes a massive, massive difference, especially in a smaller room. So that's definitely number one. Like I would rather be mixing with all stock plugins and I don't know, like a Focusrite or a PreSonus interface than all the gear and not knowing what I'm listening to any day.
Well, and what monitors are you running right now?
I have some Unity Audios.
Okay.
It's like a British speaker. And I also have some Pelonis, which have actually become the ones that I spend most of my time mixing on. And I don't know if you could see them. They're these funny looking, let's see, where is it here? Can you see that?
It's a little dark, but
a little dark,
we can kind of get a picture.
Anyways, they're Pelonis. They're a smaller speaker. And most of my mix time I spend mixing very quiet. When I start the mix, I kind of crank it. You can get a feel for stuff. But then most of the time, I mix very quietly on these smaller speakers, and I just find that the mid-range on them is just very accurate, and they have that conical tweeter, the conical tannoy tweeter and stuff, and the phase coherence of them is just really, really great. One of my buddies, who's a fantastic mastering engineer, he uses them a lot in mastering too, and he turned me on to them, and that's been uh, it really helped me step up my game or get there quicker.
Yeah,
We can all,
definitely.
I think a lot of people can get there with enough time and perspective and coming back to it and coming back to it and coming back to it. But when you're really working and trying to keep things moving along and getting stuff out to clients, I feel like professionals, a lot of it is about getting it great really quickly and not having to redo your moves too many times over.
Yeah, definitely.
Those have really helped. So yeah, that's number one. Make a long answer long.
Hey, that's good. I like
Yeah.
it.
So monitoring, which includes the room. I don't know if that's one or two, but
So we have one monitoring, two the room, and then three maybe interface. We don't know. Like,
yeah,
it's
interface is cool. I mean, I would rather have a great mic and an average interface than a fantastic interface
hmm,
and just mediocre mic. So I would rather have one great. I mean, for me, it's just my personality, maybe partly, but I would rather have one great microphone than like five mediocre microphones. Thankfully, now the great microphones can be had, for way. There's microphones that are great that are way less money than again than they used to be. There's some fantastic. One of my friends has uh, Vanguard microphones.
yeah,
You have that VF13, fantastic mic. I think it's well under $1,000. I forget six,
that's
seven
awesome.
dollars. Hopefully that's what it is. Yeah, yeah, stuff like that. These guys are making fantastic products for very reasonable prices.
It's
So
awesome that
yeah,
that's the new thing.
yeah, it is. It really is. So I would say that room and monitoring kind of flip a coin, and then I
Yeah,
would say great. The best mic you can afford if you're recording stuff. Some guys are just doing everything programming and they get somebody on the internet to record a vocal, or they're getting stems from something, then your choices might change.
yeah, that's cool. So I wanted to cover one more thing before we wrap up, and that's your commercial projects. So you have kind of your, we can call it your music production projects, and then you also have your, I guess they're called commercial projects. What do you call them? Like you do things for TV studios, like film, right? Like there's,
Yeah. So I've done a lot of different stuff. I've done produced records for labels. My wife has been very successful in the licensing realm, and so we don't really do a lot of uh, we don't do jingles, or we
yeah,
make artist records, but in the back of our minds we're making that music so that there's things that you can do, like the way you write your lyrics, the way you structure your songs and stuff, that allow it to work better for licensing.
hmm,
And so we do that. We make we make artist records with a certain amount of the songs, really like make sure that the lyrics would work on a commercial or TV or whatever,
hmm,
that sort of thing. So a lot of the stuff I've done with my wife, and we've had many different projects. To stay relevant in the licensing world, you really got to cover a lot of ground, and because it's always changing. So we've done we've done rock projects, we've done acoustic, kind of more folky-ish stuff. We've done like indie electro rock type stuff. Um, yeah.
yeah, that's
So
great.
there's that, and then just over my own production career, I've worked with a lot of different bands, a lot of independent artists, a lot of worship artists, and everything in between. And then I also do a lot of mixing. So it used to be more producing and recording, but now as more people have their own setup, I work with a bunch of producers. They come here to record drums, and then they have their own setup where they do everything else, and then they bring it back to me to mix. And that's become a really common thing. So I'm not a multi-instrumentalist, and so now a lot of the more pop programming heavy production, it's like I don't have the playing skills to do that, right? So I have less of that type of work. Whereas I used to work with a lot of bands. There used to be more bands and more, live musicians and recording artists and stuff. And so then I would do a lot of producing. But as there's become less rock bands and it's been more, you know, more production based stuff and a lot of stuff in the computer, um, people have come to me more for, getting great sounding drums and a lot of mixing, so I do a lot of mixing, and so the mixing is all over the map. You know, it's like I mixed the #1 rock record in Turkey, and you know, last year I
Wow,
mixed like a, a, a saxophone like jazz record from Japan.
that's super cool.
You know what I mean? So and then like been doing a lot of Spanish kind of worship music mixing, and then everything here in LA, and yeah, it's just kind of all over the place, and so it keeps it fresh and fun. You know, some dance music and
A little bit of everything.
a little bit of everything. So
Yeah.
kind of
Do you have like a favorite project that you've worked on?
got
I'm sure they're all fun. Like every single one of them are.
almost. Thankfully, actually, there aren't that many that aren't fun.
Yeah, that's the way to be. But
Yeah, I would say, you know, the one that I'm probably the most proud of personally would be there's a project called Cages. So it's Kayjez, and there's like a self-titled record, and it's like this indie electro pop kind of stuff. My favorite track on there would probably be "All I Want Is You." Um, that's really cool. So I'm really proud of that. And then my wife and I, we just finished. Well, it's been a few months now. Finished a kids record, although it's like a kids record that we like, so it's not really like a
oh,
kiddie
it's
record.
awesome.
Yeah, and so that was actually it actually went to #1 on satellite radio and was actually in the top 10 for quite a while.
Well, that's really cool.
Yeah,
I
so that
mean,
was just a few months ago, and so that was really cool. And even though it's like a kids record, I'm really proud of it. I think there's some really cool, unique stuff on
what's
there.
the name of the kids record?
So that's under my wife's name, which is Jess Penner,
Okay.
Penner, and the record is called Imagination.
Wow.
And
Well, when I get bored, I'll be listening to that while working because that just sounds like a really cool album.
yeah, so that was a lot of fun. And I think that one of the cool things about that record is, you know, we do it all organically. So anything that might sound like a sample, well, there's one song that's an exception, but basically everything was recorded live. You know,
Wow.
if there's any like loops or percussion or whatever, like everything is done with sound design with something that I recorded.
Wow. That's really cool. I think that shows kind of the nature of production and how you can create in the moment in the room.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why we do that is to, you know, everybody can get Logic for a couple $100, and everybody's got the same sounds and stuff. So I really love to craft sounds from scratch if possible for each project. It takes a little more time, but then you have something that nobody else has.
Yeah, it's unique to that project.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Kevin, I really appreciate you taking time to chat.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And I mean, we've loved having your class on the school, and we're hoping to always do more in the future. But it's really been cool getting to chat with you, and I look forward to hearing all the cool projects you're going to do in 2018 because we're wrapping up the year.
Yep.
Man, the holidays are already here.
Yep.
So
Already here visiting.
you already have family here?
Yeah.
Wow, wow. And do you guys have any fun holiday plans?
Well, my wife is in her third trimester right now, so
Oh yeah, she's pregnant
yeah,
right
so
now.
we're not going to be doing too much. Yeah, so we have
You're just
family
gonna be
coming over.
hanging.
We're just, you know, we'll be hanging out.
Wow, that's great. Well, have a Merry Christmas, Kevin. And for our students who are watching this right now, thanks for tuning in. We look forward to another one of these AMAs in the coming weeks. And Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Thank you.